Okay, now I'm back at my machine. I've got my binding all pressed out and I'm ready for the final step, which is to bring the binding around to the front of the quilt and stitch it down. So in doing this, I took off my 1/4 inch foot and I'm going to be using my edge stitch foot. If you're using a Bernina, this is my foot 10D. Every machine has an edge stitch foot, or you can purchase one if you don't have one. It has this guide down the center that allows you to run the guide up against the edge of your binding, and then you can move your needle over a couple of clicks to get a nice consistent stitch all the way around the edge of your quilt. So I'm going to put foot number 10D on my machine. And my Bernina is so particular. I wanted to say so smart, but if it was really smart, it would know that I changed the foot, but it isn't that smart. They have them that are that smart, but mine isn't one of them. So I'm gonna put in here that I've got foot 10D. So now it knows. And now it knows too that since I have foot 10D, I can move my needle over 2 clicks. It would not do, if I still had my 1/4 inch foot on there, which it knew I had my 1/4 inch, it would not allow me to move my needle click because it would break the needle, because a 1/4 inch foot is only for a 1/4 inch seam. So anyway, long story, 10D, 2 clicks over, okay? So I'm gonna turn my quilt over here to the front side, and I want you to see me do at least one corner, because I have a little trick for you for the corner. So I'm gonna take now, when you do this, the ideal situation is to get your stitching on the back to be as close or in the ditch if you can. And that takes some practice. When you're turning this over, you can kind of feel where you are in relation to the seam and the back of the quilt and everything. And that just comes with practice. So don't worry about it if your first one or two isn't quite perfect, you know, when you're doing this. This is a technique that you kind of pick up over time. So, but you can kind of get an idea of how the flange is going to look. It's actually 2 fabrics, you can see. And now there's, like I said earlier, there's nothing to stop you from doing the same fabric. I did a contemporary quilt a couple of years ago, very contemporary, and I didn't want a 2-color flange. I wanted a flange that would blend in with my outer border. And so I just made both pieces out of the same fabric. And so you're none the wiser. You know, you don't realize that. So anyway, I'm going to start stitching on this using my edge stitch foot. Let me see if I can move the camera down here. Let me go ahead and lower my needle. See my edge stitch foot, and I've got my needle over a couple of clicks to the right so that it's going to give me a nice even stitch. And I'm going to run the blade here, this blade, right up against the edge of my fabric. Can you see that? And I'm pretty close to a corner because I want to give you my tip for the corner. So I'm folding this over, and sometimes I can put a few clips in it just to make sure it's not going to slip and slide. And I always put on one of my gloves, because it's easier to move the fabric. My fingers are smooth, and so these little grippers on the glove make it easier to move your fabric. So I'm going to put my glove on too while I'm doing this. Okay, here we go. Hang on for the ride. I'm going to give it a little back stitch. I've got my stitch length still on 2.0. And I'm just going to come down here. And it's just catching the edge. That 2 clicks over is just catching the edge of my fabric, which is a good thing. Looks pretty good. Let me get down here and let me clip this off really quick. Love these little command hooks. They come in so handy on the machine to keep my little scissors on them. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, now I'm getting into the corner. So before I get to the corner, I'm going to take my seam that I'm coming up, or the next side that I'm coming up to, and I'm going to fold that up first. I'm going to take my glove off at this point, so that makes it easier. I'm going to fold this up first and then fold this in to give it a nice little miter. And let me move the camera over so I folded the bottom binding in first, and that keeps it from being disturbed. If I fold the upper one in first, then the bottom binding is disturbed by my blade on my edge stitch foot. So if I fold the bottom one in first, that's my trick. You have a better chance of success on getting that corner to look nice. This is how our corner turned out right here. Okay, so, and this is how it's looking from the back. So in the back, I'm close to the edge, not perfect, but that's kind of how it's going down. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the rest of this down, and then I'll have the big reveal when we come back. Welcome back. I got my binding stitched down all the way around on my quilt, and it looks pretty good from the back. It's not exactly perfect, but it's good. The stitching kind of goes in between, close to the ditch and in the ditch, and close to the ditch and in the ditch, but it's fine. Here's what the flange looks like up close. You can see that the tiny line of the fabric with a white background is contrasted up against the blue. So I'm very happy with how it turned out. It looks even and it lays flat. The corners look good. I, mitered the corners, did the faux miter, on the corners, and folded the bottom in first before the regular fabric. So anyway, my beach bracelets quilt, let me back up here so I can hold it up for you. My beach bracelets quilt is now complete, and I've got the binding on. So don't be intimidated by binding. I used to do all my bindings by hand, and then I just found that I was dreading it because I would sit with the quilt on my lap and I would get hot and my cat would jump up and lay on it. Then I would have to reposition the cat, and I just decided there has to be a better way. So when I stumbled upon this technique at a sewing show, probably about 5 years ago, I adopted it exclusively to use on my quilts, and I've been very happy with it. I don't know that they would win an award in a contest or anything, but to me, it's better to have it finished than languishing without any binding on at all, which is what it would have done if I had to do it by hand, because I'm not really a hand sewer. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today for this little tutorial about the flange binding, and I hope that I will see you again really soon in another class sometime. Okay, great. Have a nice day, everybody. Amy O'Donnell, and thanks again for coming into my sewing room for this flange binding tutorial. Have a great day.